there are other touch points. So there are multiple regional Slacks, and they do host in-person meetups quite frequently, which are sponsored. So they bring people together. These are going to be in Meet. Look at all those meets. So you can actually have a sense of people near you, which I think is a very critical thing for creating real community, because a real community is somewhere that you actually know other people. It's not just like a place where people are posting things. That's a key part of what they've done.
Welcome to Community Dissection, where we dissect online communities to give you an inside look at community design, architecture, and evolution. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Community Dissection. In this episode, we are dissecting the new member experience in Lenny's newsletter Slack community. And I have on with me a repeat guest, Laure. Do you want to introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself and where you're at currently?
I can try. I'm involved in too many things right now, but I'm a Laure, ex-cast, and I am both a community person and a product person. So I do consulting work around helping nonprofits and social impact companies develop good product management skills. And then I also do a ton of things around sort of the world of building technology that is supportive of the human experience that we want to see. And then I do a lot of community work as well.
I immediately, when I had this one on the list to dissect, I reached out to Laure, partly because I found out about Lenny's community because of Laure, but also, Laure, you have such an amazing eye for user experience and design, and you reminded me that you were on the Circle episode, which if you want more of Laure and their work, you can go back and watch the Circle episode. But I'm really excited to have your keen eye on the experience in this community. And as a member, it's always fun to hear about like the longevity of an experience, and not just sometimes we dissect communities and we're all new and we're just kind of looking at it with fresh eyes. But I'm excited to hear more about your experience as a seasoned member. So let's dive in. Well, to start, also, I'm Bri Leever, your host. This is a series, I think we're on like 30 something episodes. This is season 2. And in this season, we're exploring membership communities. So if you want more membership communities, like and subscribe, follow along the journey of community dissections, and let's dive in. So Laure, tell us a little bit about your experience in this community. What's it been like?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I have said multiple times that I've only been in one Slack community that I thought was successful, and it is Lenny's. I'm pretty down on a lot of the digital only tech as kind of communities where, you know, they're sort of more of like a platform / shadow social media experience, and they're not really doing community as I think of community. So I think that Slack is very difficult to do well, and Lenny's community has cracked the code by doing a lot of work to get there. They're a very large community, almost 14,000 people in the community. Wow. The way that you become a member of Lenny's community is to subscribe to Lenny's newsletter, and then you receive an invitation to the Slack. So the folks who are in the community are primarily product managers or product adjacent people.
This is just to show everybody. I just typed in Lenny's newsletter community. It was one of the first things that came up was his newsletter, which you have to subscribe to.
Yeah. So I think that there are benefits often for community in general when there's some kind of something that brings people together clearly as a purpose. And so being part of Lenny's community, most people are coming in to find out how to be better product managers or level up their product management career or solve product management problems. And so there's a fairly clear intention, which I think also helps to make the community successful. But what can I tell you about this?
Yeah. Okay. I won't dig in too deep. I think it's worth noting, though, that for this, and a lot of membership communities evolve this way. He started with more of an audience that then he created a more intimate space for the community. That's my understanding, because he has his podcast and a lot of like audience oriented programs.
I would want to go back, but I think that the newsletter, then the Slack community is very soon after that. The whole thing hasn't been happening for a decade. It's the last few years. And then the podcast actually came relatively later. So after he'd already gotten to, I don't remember how many, but like many, many, many thousands of subscribers and people in the community.
People think in order to start a community, I have to have a really massive audience. Having a massive audience can really help with the launch of a community, but you can also use your community to build your audience. They're very interconnected and they support each other. So we have like another type of episode where we do like community dissecting the community evolution, and we do the interview with the main community manager or founder. So Lenny, if you're watching this, we'd love to get you on for a follow-up episode to dissect the community evolution. But I'm going to go right into the Slack channel here. And Laure, I'd love to have you guide us and just tell me where to click into. But I'd love to hear first, like, what do you love about this community and their design?
I don't think that any Slack is great as an experience by itself. And so some of the things that have happened here are that there are very strong norms around coming in. I have stopped doing, I used to do a little bit more of responding to introductions. I think that does help get people excited, but usually there's some response. So that's sort of the new member experience. But what's really key to Lenny's community is that it's tied in with when you're a paid subscriber to Lenny's newsletter, you also receive a newsletter called Community Wisdom, which is actually like highlights from the Slack community. And so even just reading the newsletter, you start getting a sense of people being helpful, giving answers to people in the Slack. And then when you go in the Slack, you can find those conversations and, participate in them. You can ask questions. There are a lot of channels. I think they've tried to keep the channel creep down. Like they don't just make a channel for every single request for a channel. At the same time, there are a lot of channels. So I think coming in as a new member, it could be kind of overwhelming, but there are other touch points. So there are multiple regional Slacks, and they do host in-person meetups quite frequently, which are sponsored. So they bring people together. These are going to be in Meet. Look at all those meets. So you can actually have a sense of people near you, which I think is a very critical thing for creating real community, because a real community is somewhere that you actually know other people. It's not just like a place where people are posting things.
Yeah.
And so that's a key part of what they've done. There was for a while a thing that was kind of like a donut, but I think that's gone away, but I could be wrong. It could still be there. And I just have not participated in. I think it was Covalent was the tool they used to try to, have people have conversations. And then they now have a mentorship program so people can apply to have people mentor them and then or apply to be a mentor in the community, which isn't paid, but it's like a way of sort of building more sense of connection in the community.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I have a couple notes to add to what you were talking about. I would say this is the community that I've been a part of where the most people reached out to me on LinkedIn after I introduced myself and said like, hey, I saw you join Lenny's community. Like I probably had 10 people and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is wild. There is a lot of interconnectedness between like LinkedIn and the newsletter and the Slack channel. I think it can get pretty messy to build out like a community ecosystem based off of like Slack as your conversation space. But again, like they're doing something right because that interconnectedness takes a lot of effort, but they're clearly facilitating it not only for the flow of information, but their members are used to flowing in and out of the different spaces as well. And something else I wanted to know, your only space where you can communicate what happens in this community really quickly and succinctly. And what I do like is that there's really clearly like these first few channels that tell me what happens here. And then they separate it out. What do we talk about? And I like that because a lot of Slack communities only focus on what do we talk about? And they only have space for those different topics and not the different like identities or needs. And so I like that we have like job openings, great reads and listens, asks and feedback. Like this tells me what happens in the community. And this tells me what we talk about in the community. So especially for such a community with such a wide and complex range of topics, you do need space to break those out so people can find their conversation a little bit easier. But you're right. You got to prune so consistently. Otherwise, you can just have an ongoing constant list of channels. But I love the intimacy of these meet channels. Clearly, you can find people in your local area. I'm like, where's our meet Hawaii?
I think another thing that's sort of not really a thing that is controlled by Lenny, but is just a structural thing about this kind of community is that it is a professional space. Again, 14,000 people almost in this community, quote unquote community, in the Slack. And so I think it can be a little intimidating for people to post. But what is interesting is that I have seen a lot of communities that are in Slacks kind of die a sad death when there's too many people in them, because it almost becomes overwhelming and like people start promoting their stuff and et cetera. So they're quite good at keeping that kind of content out of the more like informational channels and encouraging people to have really good questions. The moderation, it definitely doesn't feel like it's happening in some Slacks where there's always someone coming and like policing, or being like, we don't do this here, or there's bots or whatever that are like, don't do this. So it doesn't have that feeling. It feels quite personal. And somehow there are these norms set around, okay, you don't put something and promote your self-promotional. Someone from the community will come behind you and write in a thread, put this in, promote your stuff, or they'll suggest a better place for it. But it usually is not happening from the moderators. Interestingly, it comes from more of the community. And the other thing, I guess, that seems really important is that there's sort of I don't know how often they do it, quarterly or twice a year or something, where they look at all the people who've been contributing a lot and are, pulled out to be contributing to the newsletter, and kind of create like a little acknowledgement for it. And so it kind of gives this sense of like a growth path even within the community. I think that is probably a reason why I've continued to come in, because I now have this feeling of like, oh no, if I just completely drop this, then I'm not going to be a contributor anymore, get a little star or whatever. So there's something to that as well. I think status is a really important thing in professional communities, to really understand how to do that well, where it feels like nice, but not like exploitive.
Yeah. What's so interesting is that he has established himself as a thought leader in the space. And by the nature of creating the community space, he's created an environment where new thought leaders can rise to the top, and like through contributions to the space. And I think that's really common for professional communities or communities of practice that are done well, is that they'll bake that experience of like thought leadership, or kind of like showing your chops a little bit, into the like leadership development funnel. And it's very compelling, right? Because you're like, not only am I staying connected I would assume for people who are joining this community, they probably have full-time jobs, but they're considering their own career trajectory and journey outside of their current position. And so they're looking for ways to like build their own like sort of brand, so to speak, around their product journey and product growth. And so this is a prime space where they can do that, and they can become established as a member and kind of show up. And I would imagine that not only helps them in their learning, but also in their future when they look for their next role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that your career is quite often driven by, these sort of loose ties in your network. And so communities like this can be very powerful for helping people to build enough connection that someone will help them.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you and circle back on seems like the community is a little bit self-moderating. And I know whenever it looks kind of like magical on the surface, like, wow, people just jump in and do this. Like, it usually means there was like 10 times as much effort on the back end to get it to that place. So I'm curious what your hypothesis is. Like, are there mechanisms or like little things that you've noticed in the community that you think contributed to that culture of like self-moderation? Or do you have any hypotheses around how that got developed in this space?
Well, I think that there's a team of people who work on the community. I mean, you can't have a community this large without some staff element. And I feel like Lenny's done a really great job of hiring for those roles, where people create a sense of connection with people in the community, so there's not so much a sense of anonymous, moderator person. And there's actually like, this is a person, and Lenny will highlight them, that they will be sort of mentioned in different areas. Like, when you come in general, it's only the staff who can post there. And sort of you kind of get a sense of them from that, as well as if you have any interactions with them, if you're going to be in the newsletter, they're very reachable, I guess. So even though it's a very large community, it feels still not huge, which is, I think it's a really amazing accomplishment. Very, very difficult. And I think that as far as like the magic of it, as I understand it, the community team does have some sort of back end kinds of things that they do around paying attention to things that get a lot of responses, or seeing if there are statistical things like, oh, our participation has gone down, so what might be happening, or something like that. We had I was part of a conversation about increasing, for example, the number of women or non-male people who are in the community or who are participating. Because when I first became a top contributor type of person, I was like, seems like there's not a lot of non-male people in this group. And it's really, really changed. So that thought and that care and like thinking, yeah, we're going to do things is, I think, unusual for a lot of these Slack communities.
That's awesome to hear your experience too, like firsthand, feeling that care and that your voice was heard. I think that's what gets lost when communities, that's what gets lost when a lot of communities scale, is you feel like you went from having a voice to not having a voice. And so if you can create pathways to continue to provide platforms for your target members, and you keep like refining who your target is. It's, with more and more people, you have to refine like who exactly do we want to like reward and like elevate in this community. And part of that is like people who are willing to contribute in this space and make this all better. Like the more you contribute and make this community better together, the more like we want to hear your input. And it sounds like you're the prime example of that.
There's another really interesting thing about digital communities specifically. I think Slack actually has some advantages over things like Mighty Networks and Circle in their sense of immediacy or like humanness. But what I'll say is that in a Slack, you don't actually want everybody to participate, right? 14,000 people were participating. It would not be a good community. So it's a fascinating thing where the ideal is to have the level of participation to kind of get to a certain point and then plateau, so that there's always good content, but it's a manageable amount of content. So if you are reading, you don't want to have to go in and feel like, oh, and, look at all these highlighted channels, right? I probably only go into 3 or 4 channels regularly, and then, kind of dip into others when I have a specific curiosity or question. So really, it's like you want there to be a maintenance of that level that feels like there's still people who are interested and engaged. And that has to come from really having a great onboarding experience and early experience, so that the new people still come and ask these questions, often the same questions over and over again, because of the nature of Slack, where things kind of disappear. Although in Lenny's community does not disappear, which is also very, very unusual for a Slack community, because I think he has a special relationship with Slack in which 14,000 people can be on there and they're not paying a per seat price for that, obviously. But yeah.
Oh, that's a nice hack.
They don't lose information, but still, like, just searching through Slack for your question versus just asking it is probably not going to happen. So.
Well, and that's a great point. I wanted to actually show, so this was a little while ago, but I still wanted to show what the onboarding email was when I joined. So I did join back in like March. So it has been a minute. Maybe they've updated it, but they essentially have joined the Slack community. They kept it really simple, 3 steps. Join the Slack community, subscriber only, curated resources, deals, coaches, and recruiters. So it's a really simple step, but it's jam-packed with value. I can really quickly figure out like which of these is going to catch my eye. community resources. And then actually, they just kept it to 2 steps, which is great. Step 3 is like, this is some nice psychological manipulation. Like, oh, look, you already did it. You did 3 steps. And then I like the little housekeeping note ever playing back. But and then popular podcast. So I love the simplicity of this welcome email. It's like, here's the community, here's the content, dive in and kind of choose your own adventure. Keeps it really safe and to the point.
If you're enjoying our community dissection episodes and have a community of your own, then I invite you to download our community audit checklist. This is a quick list of things that you can go through and identify in your community that you have, are missing, or might need to be clarified. So don't wait today to improve your own community. And if you're interested in having your community dissected by me and a couple other community professionals, you can nominate your community through the form in the description.
I'm curious if there's anything you would choose to modify about the community and how it's structured.
I guess with 14,000 people, you can't limit the channel creep fully, but I am curious whether what's happening with channels, like of all those channels, I don't know if they're kind of archiving things. I don't think I've been any channels that were archived there. So it feels like a lot to have to manage if you were the community organizer folks. But what else would I do? I mean, the thing that I think all communities could benefit from is cohort onboarding. And so if I were myself running this community, I would consider that. It would be a lot of work just because of the number of people, but I think it could be maybe even a premium experience or something where, people feel like they really want it. Maybe there's an application process. I don't know. But I think if you can get people into more sense of like other people being people as quickly as possible, as opposed to just going in and being like, oh, there's like, from somebody's Slack little profile and what they're writing about, I have no idea what they're like or who they are or anything like that, right? That doesn't give you any sense of a person. So I think that'd be probably the thing that I would do, just because I think it's a thing that all communities should do.
It seems like the strategy here is like low cost and high volume and a lot of value. Like I'm not saying like low cost means less value, but if I were looking at like the next iteration of this community, I would wonder, like, is there a higher value and a higher like price point that you could go with with a more targeted group of your members and segment them into like a different tier or experience or different types of programming? But one thing that really comes to mind, I'd have to like suss out that strategy a little bit. The one thing that I think this community could really benefit from is an experience like what I saw on the Pathfinder Automation Everywhere community. So when communities hit this kind of explosive scale, it can be really helpful to segment their members into the different like journeys that they might be on within the community. For example, in this community, you might have like new product managers who are just trying to get their feet under them. They're trying to learn. They want to learn from others. They're going to ask the same questions over and over again. But segmenting them into like a slightly different experience, or maybe being able to get more specific about the types of content that you're pushing to them, because this is the need for our new product managers. Then you might have really seasoned product managers, or you might have people who are maybe like moving into a second iteration of their career and they're bringing their product knowledge into this whole new industry. Or I don't know, I'm just kind of brainstorming, but segmenting 3 different journeys and having an experience in the landing page, whether it's an application or something that they're filling out where they're telling you more about themselves to help guide them towards those resources. Even if it's as specific as just like what type of product, we have all of these different talk channels. Maybe there would be a way to segment their members a little bit more automatically.
I agree with you and disagree with you.
Yeah.
So
tell me more.
I'm a big fan of segmenting for sure. Typically, I want to segment around motives and not so much personas. And so I think that you're right, like having a path that's like, I want to grow my career, or I want to help other people, or I want to just kind of like lurk in the background and find out stuff. To understand that better will help the community. And maybe I don't think you can do this with Slack, but it would be super awesome if there is somebody who's made a bot for this. Bot people, listen to that, but that would point people to like the channels based on an onboarding email, right? So I can say, these are the things I'm going to pick some areas I'm interested in, and I won't have to choose through all these channels. I'll just kind of give an idea, and the bot will kind of fuzzy logic it into saying, okay, here's some places that you might want to join. But even that, I'm not sure is important. And I also want to just say quickly, I don't like the idea so much of sort of siloing people who have different experience levels in a community. I think that's typically, especially in Slacks, goes wrong, because the people who want to provide value to newer people should be in there with the newer people, and the newer people need the norm setting of seeing people with more experience who are like obviously know what they're doing to feel excited about it. But I know what you're saying. It's like, how could there be a little more of a personalized experience for people coming in? Mm-hmm. And then the question is like, how do you follow through with that?
I totally agree with your point about, I think the conversation spaces is where there needs to be a lot of interconnectivity, like a lot of opportunity for serendipity between our different segmented like roles or people. I think content is where the segmentation comes into play. It's super, because if I can find the answer to my questions sooner rather than later through longstanding content. And then even events, because what I've seen can happen is sometimes those seasoned professionals can get tired of answering. They come in, they're like super excited to help like new members, but unless they kind of get in like a mentorship role with like a couple members, they can get kind of burnt out on continuing to answer. And so, which is fine. I think they kind of flow through a funnel or a life cycle in that way. But in order to kind of keep them around, like some sort of programming that's just for seasoned professionals to help maintain that value for them. Not that they need to be completely siloed in their experience. I totally agree. But sometimes it can be helpful to make sure that they're still being served and not just like weighed down by new members.
Yeah, I think that you're pointing to something really important, which is, I think that, I mean, I'm very self-serving in this thought, but I feel like when you have folks who really contribute to the community at sort of the next level, then the acknowledgement is really good. And there could be more that you can do to incentivize that in a way that isn't about like giving people a thing, but is access to, higher level programming, say, or like networking. I think that's something that could be really valuable, right? If they were worried about engagement in this community, then that could be something that would really help.
Yeah, that's a huge incentive to be like kind of considered in that top contributor level of programming or access to events, or that's
being like sort of a graduation level, or not graduation, but a graduated level. Yeah. So that you could see a path forward as you start contributing, being like, oh, and the more you contribute with valuable things, right? So it's not just purely like a game the system thing,
right?
But the value that you're providing for others, then maybe there are ways that can come back to you. And a lot of it's just paying it forward types of stuff in this community, honestly. But I think there's also something about, and now we're doing something special for you.
And I love when communities make that kind of like pathway very transparent, and not that it needs to be gamified. Transparent doesn't equal like gamification. So it's not like we're saying when you contribute 10 times, you'll be a top contributor and get this badge. Like that's not what I'm saying. But in the onboarding email, you're like, hey, if you love it here and this is your jam, like consider contributing in these 3 spaces. Once a quarter, we go through and look at who are the top people who are giving back in this community. And we hand select our top contributors to be a part of our inner circle. Like just something that outlines, like is really transparent about like, we're on the lookout for people who are giving back in this community in these 3 ways is like, oh, it just makes me feel so good, because then it's not this like mysterious like click at the top and you're like, how did anybody get there? I want to be in that. How do I get there? Like give them some like get transparent so that everybody has access to it.
Yeah. And I even say, if possible, make that feel a little less about us and you. So, I think that when this works very well when the community recognizes the value as opposed to the organizers, right? So when you're like, we do this, you can kind of create this sense of like favoritism or something. So if those metrics can be like, yeah, your thing got lots of responses, or you got a lot of people appreciated this or something like that, then that can work really well.
Yes. Always tying it back directly to the outcome and the impact that their actions had in the community. I love that note. It's really good. Awesome. Well, Laure, are there any final takeaways or thoughts or anything you want to share about your experience in this community?
No, I mean, I would recommend for anybody who has touch with a large Slack community to check it out. Even if you're not a product person, I think it's just a very interesting anthropological experiment of like, oh, wow, like this is working. And it surprises me every time.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have the link to join Lenny's Slack community in the description of this episode. And I like to say in every episode, if you're a part of this community, one, like congratulations and thank you for contributing to like an incredible Slack community that provides value for thousands of people. That's amazing. You should feel so proud to be a part of it. Two, if you're a part of Lenny's team and you're listening to this, I hope you take this episode and any advice or feedback that we gave with the spirit of generosity and curiosity that it is intended. We hope to support membership communities that are doing great things, and we want to show people how to build great communities. So thank you for being a thriving example of that for us to dissect. And stick around for more episodes. We've got lots more membership communities that we are dissecting, and we'd love to also do a evolution dissection on Lenny's newsletter. So Lenny, reach on out and we can get that set up. All right, Laure, thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you all next time.